Thanks so much for joining. Welcome to day 2 of AnnotateED 2025. Hope you all are looking forward to a really great day 2 and that you enjoyed yesterday. My name is Brian Malone. I am part of the Hypothesis team. I'll give you a bit more of an introduction in a moment here. But my presentation today is on modeling and prompting meaningful annotations. The premise here is you might enable a hypothesis reading in your course, or if you're not actively a hypothesis user right now, maybe you're doing, discussion boards or whatever you're doing to encourage out of class participation in your course. But we might build these assignments, we might create these assignments, and we don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place for how students could participate meaningfully. In other words, like we might create a hypothesis-enabled assignment, we might deliver that assignment to students, but students are sort of entering that blank. And so I wanted to do a sort of a talk on how we might be able to model and prompt more meaningful annotations from our students. And we're going to move in sort of 3 parts. We're going to talk about the initial build of the initial prompt for the activity. We're going to talk about like teachers' prompts for the activity. We're going to talk about how we might prompt students to write meaningful annotations. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to get students to reply to each other in meaningful ways. And while this is quite focused on or sort of assuming that you're using hypothesis, those of you that are not hypothesis users, I'm hoping that we're packed full of tips here that might help you facilitate discussion in other forums as well. So I have the Q&A open and I'm able to look. We are currently still counting slower now, but we're at about 28 attendees. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to go ahead and click through. Oh, I'm also joined by my 20-pound orange cat. His name is Lenny. I was going to kick him out, but here's the thing. If I kick him out, he's going to be banging against my door to try and come in. And he's actually the poster child for this, those of you that are fellow cat owners, an orange tabby boy. This means he's kind of the poster child for leaving a lot of annotations that have absolutely no substance. So I actually figured he might be a good mascot for this presentation. So thank you again. My name is Brian Malone. I'm joining you from the Hartford, Connecticut area. I joined Hypothesis in November 2025, and I'm the customer success manager for our North American East region, which means if you are at a partner school, your school uses Hypothesis, and you fall into the North American East region, I'm your guy for trainings, for one-on-one instructional design support, and happy to meet with you all to help you start setting up hypothesis assignments, or if you're a staff member working with faculty, I can, I'm happy to help you, do that sort of instructional design consultation work as well. And those of you on the North American West region, you'll be working with my counterpart, Jessica George, who's wonderful. And prior to this, I was an instructional designer at different universities for about 4 years, and started everything off as a college English teacher. I taught linguistics and academic writing, so that's a bit about my background, and let's dive in here. So as I mentioned, we're going to move in 3 phases: instructor presence, prompting meaningful original annotations from students, and prompting student-to-student responses. As we move through the presentation, please feel free to add your questions into the Q&A. I will either answer as I go or leave time at the end to address those, depending on the nature of the question. But let's go ahead and start off by talking about instructor presence and annotation activities. And this is not a comprehensive list, but I was thinking to myself, what are some roles that instructors might have in creating a social annotation activity? And the first would be like prompting. So this means creating the assignment, guiding the conversation, and preparing for any sort of follow-up. If you're in a synchronous class, that might mean facilitating a classroom discussion. But for asynchronous classes, that might mean a follow-up announcement. It might be just following up by responding to the actual annotations. So whatever that looks like for you. There's participating, which is like responding to the conversation publicly, redirecting and pushing thinking. So this means if you're seeing your students have a discussion that's maybe veering into the sort of inaccurate territory, then you can sort of intervene and bring the conversation back in a certain direction. Or if somebody says something particularly brilliant, a role is also to celebrate that and emphasize those ideas. And a final is evaluating. So this is referring to grading or offering individualized feedback. We're going to talk today specifically about prompting and participating. And that's the header of the next slide. So when we get to prompting and participating, I wanted to first mention our little hypothesis overlay, the image on the right-hand side. This is the hypothesis tool, and very exciting. This is showing our new @mentions feature at play. So we have some students that are responding to each other and directly tagging the other students that they want to acknowledge. So this one says, Ruby, this reminds me of our recent conversation about data biases. And so, yes, we now allow, we now have the feature enabled where you can @mention your students can @mention you and each other. We're hoping that adds a new layer of conversation here. So when it comes to prompting and participating, how do we start? Well, one starting point is to actually use a hypothesis sample assignment as a starting point. And so I'm going to follow that link here. On our website, underneath the resources tab, we have educator resources. And the educator resources are going to include things like help articles on all the different LMSs that we support. But it's also going to include things like sample assignments and activities. Some of these are ones that we wrote. Some of these are ones that have been sent to us by faculty users over time. And these sample activities that we wrote, like this is our general annotation assignment, we invite you to actually just copy and paste this and modify it to your context. No need to credit us or anything. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to get up and running with a hypothesis assignment. So let me go back here. Slideshow mode. Yeah. So that's one place to start. And so you can peruse our sample assignments and see if any of those are ones that you would like to maybe use to get yourself started. You can also prompt student responses throughout the reading. This is one of the most powerful uses of our tool. What I mean by this is you might annotate passages that allow you to teach through the text. This would include things like you adding your own annotations that clarify complex ideas, emphasize key takeaways, ask students to connect the text to outside sources in their own life, etc. So this is just you going through the text yourself and bringing students' attentions to specific moments in the text, emphasizing those key takeaways and planting the discussion yourself. And then there's modeling effective annotations as an active participant in the conversation. Another powerful use of our tool is, of course, that the instructor can be present in the conversation. And if you're thinking, like, what is a good annotation from a student going to look like, then by participating in the conversation, you can sort of follow your own model and show students what you're sort of looking for. And again, the premise here is students don't necessarily know how to leave meaningful annotations and replies. So let's think about that. What does it mean to leave a meaningful annotation and reply? Well, there's lots of ways we can get into this. One suggestion I have is to consider coding what different annotations can accomplish. And by this, I'm referring to this sort of, if you do like a qualitative research study and you have a transcript from participants and you're trying to look for trends in the research, you might go through that transcript and code for certain themes that you're looking for in the research. And I'm thinking we can kind of do the same thing with student annotations. We're looking through and we're saying, what comments are students leaving that are doing the most to contribute to the conversation, the success of that conversation? Can we code those? To help us figure out like what is going to be a meaningful contribution? And here we have some examples where one student here took an equation and wrote it out in prose. So this idea that we can write out problems and describe how to solve them. We could analyze presented solutions or strategies. We can clarify information by asking questions. We can identify key terms and define those in our own words. We can identify and explain relationships. We can describe how to proceed in answering a problem. So all kinds of possibilities here. This is not comprehensive, but just sort of thinking, what are the students already doing and that are making the best discussions stand out. And once we have sort of defined that, that can sort of inform how we prompt future assignments. And having thought a little bit about our instructor role here, I'm going to turn now to prompting meaningful original annotations. And what I'm talking about here is like, how do we get the students to understand what types of things they could say that would make the conversation really meaningful? And I want to have a couple of disclaimers here. This presentation is largely, I've done some curating work, but the ideas here, I want to make sure that I give credit where it's due. Many of these come from other scholars, many other activities that have been talked about at length by people outside of Hypothesis. Some of these ideas come from customer success managers of Hypothesis Past. Some of them, I don't know exactly where all of these come from, but just a disclaimer that I'm doing some curating work here, and I don't want to say that these are Brian Malone originals. So you may have seen some of these before. And I also want to make the disclaimer that I'm not suggesting that you should do all of these or that these are necessarily a comprehensive list of possible ways you can prompt annotations. Some of the tips that I'm going to share with you may make more sense for your discipline and some might make less sense. So I'm inviting you to sort of hear which of these ideas kinds of stick and how can you modify them for your own context. And our first way into prompting student annotations is to give the students a role in the conversation. We know from studies in adult learning that when students feel like there's a reason for them to be talking about this thing, or they have a particular role, or their voice really matters in the context of a conversation, they're far more likely to show up for it. So there's a few ways we can do this. One is a fun activity where we have the students annotate by impersonation. So this would be you giving the students a specific scholar or historical figure or character from a book. Ask them to take on that role and annotate in the voice of that character or person. Or use unique group roles. And this is actually a more traditional sort of, you may have heard advice like this before, where we give students particular roles in the conversation. Some of these might include make somebody be the questioner. So your job is to ask questions and keep the conversation moving. Or the director, your job is to make sure everybody's participating, and your job is to add new sort of thoughts into the conversation and to bring the conversation to another level. Illustrator, this is the person who adds multimedia to annotations, which is something Hypothesis offers. The connector, your job is to connect annotations in the text to other points in the discussion. And there's plenty of other roles we could think of, but this idea that we can give students roles so that they have a very specific function in the conversation. And then this idea of open-ended questions, my coworker Jess wrote a really great blog post about the magic of open-ended questions. So here, what we would do is we would tell students, one form of a meaningful annotation is asking a really good question. So how do we do that? Well, we can tell students about asking different kinds of open-ended questions. You're going to see 3 levels here, and I'm not at all suggesting that there's a hierarchy. These are actually just 3 separate categories. But level 1 questions would refer to text-based and questions that reference the text directly. Level 2 are they speculate about the social and cultural considerations surrounding a text or issue. And level 3 questions are personal connections to the text. So we're prompting students to ask open-ended questions, and just by giving students a sort of framework, so just by telling students, hey, when you ask your own questions and annotations, consider these different levels of question asking. And just by giving them this as a model, then students are less likely to just read the reading and say, I have no idea what kind of annotation to say. I have no idea how to follow up on this. Just by giving them these 3 levels, they can think, oh, my instructor asked me to make to ask good questions about how this relates to ongoing events or something like that. That'd be a level 2 question. Maybe you tell the students, hey, I'd love to see annotations that are questions, open-ended questions that, check each of these boxes. So maybe ask 3 questions, one for each level, right? So we can actually we can give students this model for asking good questions, and we can prompt them to give us annotations in this vein. And then when it comes to just other sort of and maybe non-question based annotations, but their own sort of original thoughts about the text, we can also prompt students to make different types of text-based connections. One is a text-to-self connection. So how is the text relating to anything in your life or your experiences? Another is text-to-text. How is this relating to something else we've read in class or something you've read in another course? Text to world. How is this text relating to events going on today or events that have happened in the past? And text to media. So how does this relate to something you've seen in pop culture or a TV show or read online or heard in a song, right? So again, just by giving students these 4 different types of text connections, we can ask them, when you leave your annotations, can you consider maybe leaving one of each of these types of connections, or, you know, 2 connections to yourself, 2 connections to other texts, whatever makes sense in your own discipline, or whatever makes sense for the nature of that reading. But giving students specific types of annotations and text-based connections we're looking for can really enhance that discussion. Some prompt ideas, and this is the part where I really want to reemphasize that disclaimer. Some of these you're going to hear and you'll be like, that's not going to work. That's totally fine. Hopefully some of these you'll hear and you'll say, oh, I could definitely modify that and work with this in my own context. But one prompt idea is this idea of a 3-2-1, right? So we're asking students to name 3 things that they've learned, 2 things that confirm what they already know, and 1 question that they still have. And we can actually scale this up, so it could maybe be like a 6-4-2 or something like that. But whatever works for the nature of the reading and the length of it, and what you're hoping they get out of the reading. Another one is this idea of 4 A's. The A's refer to assumption, agree, argue, and aspire. So what assumptions does the author of the text hold? What do you agree with in the text? What do you argue with in the text? And which parts of the text feel like aspirational to you? Do you see yourself or do you see yourself moving in a certain direction based on what the text has taught you? So another is SIT. 1 surprising factor idea, 1 interesting factor idea, 1 troubling or tricky factor idea. Again, just providing these models to students to say, hey, if you annotate according to this SIT model, it's more likely that your annotation is going to add something substantial to the conversation. And I'm a big proponent of explicitly telling students what kinds of things are going to make annotations meaningful. Another one is this visible thinking strategies. This is kind of a cool one. This idea of compass points, just simply by giving students this compass before they enter a text and asking them, hey, can your annotations identify things that you feel like you really need to know in this text? Can you identify things that are exciting you in this text? Can you identify aspects of this text that reveal what the author's stance is? Or can you make suggestions for the author for our conversation here? Or is there anything that's really concerning you about this text? Maybe this is something you disagree with. Maybe this is something that you find alarming or urgent on a global scale. So there's different ways to maybe interpret all of these, but just giving students a compass and saying, hey, if you're wondering how to annotate or how to begin a conversation based on this text, think about these compass points, and maybe they'll help you arrive at something. And then another one is just this very basic template. I used to think X, now I think Y. And asking students to fill that out, fill in the blank on that. I used to think X, now I think Y. This is really good for just that sort of metacognitive aspect of learning. So, students are reflecting on how their thinking about a topic has changed over the course of reading the text. This is really good because we might read a text and we might say, that was really interesting. And we walk away from it, but then, a week later, we're thinking, I remember that that text was interesting, but I don't really remember why. Having students write this sort of explicit one line takeaway gives them something to hang on to, and especially over the course of annotating and returning to the conversation based on the replies their classmates are leaving, this sort of one sentence reflection give them a way back into the text, and it gives them a sort of key takeaway, some way to articulate how their own learning has happened based on the text that we've provided. And the last, and this is one that I really love this one, and it's one that I would like to use. Reading exit annotations. The idea here is that at the very end of your reading, you as the instructor write an annotation that asks the students to reply with a response to one of the following prompts. You may ask the students to summarize this reading in one sentence. You may ask them to fill in the blank. Something I still don't understand about the reading is. You may ask them to state the most important fact or idea from the reading and explain why they chose it. Or you may ask them to describe something from the reading they'd like to learn more about and why. And I really love these because if you're familiar with the way that our tool works, you could leave this annotation at the bottom of your reading. You can come back to that one annotation and just look at all the replies in one spot to that one annotation. And no matter how large your class is, this could give you a very good at a glance view of like, what are my students saying right now? What questions they still have? Are they identifying the sort of key takeaway I was hoping they would? It's just a really good way to get quick sort of high level view of whether this reading is having the impact that you were hoping that it would have. So I really am a big fan of the exit annotations. And now that we've talked about teacher role and we've talked about how we can give students different frameworks for writing meaningful annotations, the last big piece is prompting students to reply to each other. So I have some memes here for you. And I'm going to pause just for a second because I think my internet might be catching up to me. Okay, sorry about that if there was any glitchiness. Okay, so I have some memes here, and I started graduate school in 2016, which is to say I taught my first college level class in fall of 2016. And I know for sure that discussion board posts still looked like this. So we've got somebody wrote, there's nothing more fake than a college student's reply to a classmate's discussion post. And the response was, I completely agree with your take on college students' discussion board responses. I too believe that such interactions are insincere and that they do not add value to students' academic experiences. Or, me in real life, okay. Me over discussion board. Hello, fellow student. I completely agree with everything you stated in your post. Thank you so much for opening my eyes to a brighter and more enlightening future. Have a glorious day. I want to point out this was 2018. I just don't think discussion boards have changed all that much since then. And so what I often would see with my students was this sort of like overwrought, wordy kind of answer because we'd ask them to say things to each other and they weren't saying anything all that substantial, but they were trying to make it look and sound impressive. And so something like social annotation allows us to just have far more organic conversations. We can be less concerned with quantity and more concerned with quality. You can just leave an annotation that says, I love this. Like, this is really exciting to me, because you know that later on there's going to be far more thoughtful annotations as well. And it's actually okay and maybe even encouraged to just have that organic, like, emotional response to the text, as long as they're still adding substantial conversation later on. But students aren't thinking anymore about oh, this is one of my two replies. I better make it kind of long, right? So we're not seeing students do what Alex is doing here necessarily. Um, so how do we get students to respond to each other in meaningful ways? Well, one is this tag feedback protocol. And this is basically a sort of fill in the blank. So instead of saying, hi, I like what you said there, let's tell some things we like, ask thoughtful questions, and give suggestions. So the template is something more like, oh, I really connected with your point about X. I'm wondering what you meant by Y. And have you ever heard of this other thing that I've heard of that I think actually complements what you're talking about here? And I want to emphasize, I don't view this as students being critical to each other. I view this as students being additive. And so they're saying, you made a really great point. Here's another example of that. And if they are being more critical, then it's not a negative thing. They might be saying, hey, I hear the claim that you're making here, but I'm wondering how this example either contradicts or supports that claim that you're making, right? So telling students to basically affirm something, but also ask really good questions and then give suggestions. Just this model alone, you're helping students understand how to enter into the conversation. And that does bring me to the end. I have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to check my Q&A. But if you're interested in working with our team, whether you've been using Hypothesis quite a lot or you're interested in getting started, please do email success@Hypothesis. Jessica and I both received this email, and whoever the correct customer success manager is will respond and be very happy to reach out to you. So with that, there's one question in the chat, and it says, do you place these prompts in the actual text, or do you deliver these thinking ideas in their LMS or homework, etc.? Yeah. So yes, I think it depends on which stage of the process you're in. Maybe in the instructions, you have a little section of your instructions that says something along the lines of what will make your annotations meaningful, and then you provide that sort of template I was talking about. So it's like, I want you to use this SIT model here, right? So you explain what that is, and you ask them right in their instructions. But something like the exit annotation, yeah, that's going to be an actual annotation in the reading, or any other annotation where you're trying to teach through the text. So you're saying, hey, this part here is really jargon heavy, and what they're actually talking about is this. So you're kind of teaching through the text. Those will be actual teacher annotations right in the text. Margaret, I do have a link, and I will drop. Oh, we have two questions in the chat about will the slides be available. So I am going to grab these slides for you right now, and I will find a way to get them to you. And then one more question from the chat. Sorry, and I know we are actually just at time. Does anyone have initial assignments where the whole point is for students to practice submitting certain types of posts or critiquing sample annotations is helpful or unhelpful, and why? Elizabeth, I think we are just about at time. That's such a good question. The first part of your question made me think of our Annotate the Syllabus assignment, which is actually like a way for students to practice using Hypothesis and practice annotation and interacting with each other. So I kind of thought of that, but I want to think more about that question. And I will work with my team to get back to you on that. And I will work with my team to make sure that you all can have access to these slides. So thank you all for coming. We are right at time, so I'm going to go ahead and close this session. And I hope you really enjoy the rest of your time at AnnotateED. Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.